Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Petty revenge chicken tastes good. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Supermarket cashier gets revenge on a Karen. I had picked up some groceries at our local market and was in the checkout line. In front of me was a Karen on her cell phone, loudly complaining to the person on the other end about the lack of choices in the store and the lack of toilet paper. During checkout, she talked trash about the grocery store and its employees, all but ignored the cashier, then stalked off in a huff as soon as she paid. As the cashier began to ring up the groceries, he noticed that Karen had forgotten to take a package of chicken she'd paid for. Barely raising his voice, he called out, "Ma'am? Ma'am? You forgot your chicken." He made no show of looking around, then said, "Oh well, I guess she's gone. Want some free chicken?" And our second story. Refuse to pay? Feel the credit pinch. First of all, this happened way back in 2002, and to a colleague to me, who referred the story to me. This happens back in a time where there were still a lot of people that thought of IT and programming as the pastime of nerds and not real work. I worked at a call center doing internet support and had a colleague that ran a development business on the side, trying to build it to support him. He got an order for a small program from a large power company, revenue around $500 million, by far the largest company around. A price was agreed, contract drawn. He had lawyers and his extended family that helped him draw up a good standard contract and signed by an authorized part in the large power company. He developed the program, delivered it, and got a sign-off that he had delivered to satisfaction. Then he sent the bill, and he didn't get any money. He contacted the manager who'd signed the contract, who said he'd authorized the payment, but that it was stuck with his manager. The hire manager had looked at the bill and basically said, "This is not real work, we're not paying." The fact that my colleague was 18 in a one-man business and not even full-time probably made him think he could get away with it. My colleague sent reminders of his invoices, but did not get the money. When he finally managed to get through to the hire manager and was told that they would not pay, he threatened action, to which the hire manager replied something, "Well, you can try. We have a legal team and a lot of resources." My colleague, fuming, did not admit defeat, though. Instead of suing the large power company in civil court, which would have taken time and been expensive, he went to courts and started bankruptcy proceedings against the power company. He knew he'd have no chance to win, as the company had plenty of assets, but he had his contract and his invoices, which was enough evidence to start bankruptcy proceedings. The problem for the power company? They traded electricity and heating production certifications and CO2 permissions a lot, as was and is standard among power companies here. And just having bankruptcy proceedings against them affected their credit score, potentially costing them millions in interest and higher pay for certifications and permissions, as other companies and authorities would be less willing to sell a company with a non-AAA credit rating. My colleague was paid very quickly with the understanding that he would withdraw his bankruptcy request, which he did. Wow, makes a great David versus Goliath pro-revenge story. And our next story. You robbed the wrong guy. Just some quick history to set the stage. At a younger age, I moved from Chicago to Baltimore to take a job with the federal government. When I started, I hit it off with a couple of guys who've since become my best friends. We all lived together for about 5 years until one by one we started moving on, getting married, etc. One guy, we'll call him John, left our place of employment and took a job as a Secret Service agent. As everyone went their separate ways, I thought I'd make a smart decision as a young professional and buy a house. In 2007, right before the financial collapse. Needless to say, immediately after buying, I was upside down big time and struggling. I had some other coworkers move in, but they only lasted about a year before abruptly moving out, leaving me scrambling to find a roommate, thus setting the stage for my revenge story. I ended up posting on a bunch of venues to find a new roommate. One guy ended up far and above the best option. We'll call him Russell. Russell was a military vet who'd served a couple of tours downrange and was now a sous chef at a local restaurant. He was easy to get along with, so I pulled the trigger in haste without doing the proper checks I should have, primarily due to being in a desperate financial situation. The first sign something was off was when Russell moved in. He came with just a couple of boxes and a TV, no bed, no furniture. Next clue came when he was chatting me up about his time in the military. On the surface, he could talk the talk, but as I got more nuanced, his answers became more, well, wrong. He claimed he used to be a former Ranger, so he would have known the topics discussed. The final clue was a classic one. He started making excuses for rent payment on month 2. By this time, I knew something was not right, so I politely told Russell to move out, which he did immediately. Once gone, I went to Home Depot to buy new locks, and much to my surprise, my debit card didn't work. Come to find out, Russell had stolen a checkbook and cleaned me out. Every cent I had in my account was gone. At this time, I was feeling a mixture of anger and fear of not being able to pay my mortgage and disappointment in myself for not vetting them properly. When I ended up telling John, he was livid. He wanted every detail about the situation. Little did I know, John told all his coworkers, and they immediately opened a case on Russell. For those of you who don't know, the Secret Service also deals with financial/economic crimes, albeit normally on a much larger scale than my savings account. Within a few days, Secret Service agents had tracked him down and interrogated and arrested all the individuals who had cashed the fake checks on Russell's behalf. One turned and advised Russell would be at Dick's Last Resort at the Baltimore Inner Harbor that night. John and his crew changed into plain clothes and went there to wait. Lo and behold, Russell shows up and acts like he owns the place. He started announcing that he was leaving on deployment to Iraq, so he wanted to buy the entire bar drinks, with my money, I should add. As he was standing there paying for everyone's drinks, John stood up and screamed, "Secret Service, you're under arrest!" 3 agents slammed him down, cuffed him, and pulled him out to where 2 black SUVs rolled up on the boardwalk to take him away. My other friend, who'd gone to observe, said the entire restaurant paused in stunned silence for about 30 seconds. They take Russell in, and by this time, John says he's crying his eyes out. The best part of the ordeal? John made him add in his written confession, "I routinely pretend to be an Army Ranger, but have never served." Before being taken to the city jail, Russell asked John, "Why did the Secret Service arrest me?" To which John replied, "You robbed the wrong guy." Needless to say, I was a bit more careful in choosing my next roommate. And our last story. Well, you were warned not to park there. This story happened about 15 years ago, give or take. At the time, I worked for a small industrial railroad in my city that served about 20 different industries along the docks. To get to the docks from the yard where I would pick up the inbound deliveries to the industries cars, we had a mile of street trackage that ran right down the middle of a small street. Numerous bars lined the street on one side with the river on the other side. Because of city regulations, we were only allowed to operate along that span of track between specific hours, typically 11 at night to about 5 in the morning. However, since the bars were open at that time, it also meant that we had to trundle along at a crawl, usually walking pace or just about that, to keep the locomotive on the front end of the movement. Every night I went down that street, there would typically be 2 or 3 people who'd parked too close to the tracks, prompting me to have to get people to move their cars. It wasn't a major problem, just an annoyance, except for one guy. It seemed that every single night I would have to stop about halfway down because this guy would always park his truck at an angle in the street, as opposed to parallel parking. There were some angle parking spaces, but they were further down where there wasn't rails in the road. Every single night I'd have to head into the bar this guy owned and bug the guy to get him to move his truck. Most of the time, it'd take him a good 30 minutes to an hour to drag himself out and move the thing. This meant, of course, I was losing time that I needed to get my job done. After months of this, I finally decided that I'd had enough, so I decided to have the guy towed. Yeah, that didn't work out as well as I'd hoped. Turns out the guy also had some job with the city or the mayor's office or some friend in either, so no one would dare come out and tow his truck. I think I waited there a good hour before he eventually came out and moved it, even having the gall to flip me the bird as he left. At that point, I decided not only was I totally done with the guy, but if the chance arose, I was going to teach him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Nothing physical per se, but just a hard-learned lesson. A couple days later, I found myself heading down the track with a half a dozen heavy cars with machinery bound for the docks. As I rounded the curve and neared the place where the guy always parked, I gently applied the independent brakes on the locomotive. This would slow the heavy ride, but wasn't enough to stop it outright. At least not quickly. I waited until the very last minute, laying on the horn and applying the full brakes, bringing everything to a screeching halt in the middle of the street. As I felt the brakes begin to hold, there was this loud thunk, and screeching and tearing of metal as the train simply punted the truck out of the way, tearing the bed clean off in the process. This did not go unnoticed, as a crowd had started to gather out front of the bar when they heard the train coming. I stay in the cab, calling back to dispatch and inform them that I'd struck a parked car, and they needed to get the police and a tow truck out to my location. All the while, I could hear this guy screaming, heard him over the sound of the locomotive no less, at the top of his lungs about how he was going to have me thrown in jail, sue the company, and all manner of things. Locking the doors, I opted to just wait in the cab for the boys in blue to arrive. Eventually, they pop around and start taking statements. I explained the problem, nothing I could do. Well, I could have, but it wouldn't have been a good idea. Simply slam on the brakes due to the cargo I was carrying, and the only reason I hit the truck is because it was improperly parked. I added that the gentleman had been warned about it in the past, that something like this could happen, and had ignored the warnings. The man, for his part, was simply livid, hopping around, yelling at me, yelling at the cops, and just beside himself. In the end, he was ticketed for his bad parking, obstructing the passage of a train, and his truck was totaled. And he ended up on the hook for paying for it. Truck was brand new, not yet paid off, or so I was told. It took about 2 hours to clean up the mess, and I was, per company rules, suspended for a week during the company investigation, but honestly, it was worth it. Didn't have any problems with him from that point forward either. Well done. Especially nice when someone who thinks they're untouchable gets touched by the frisky hands of justice. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.